Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen by Zeus to wield the power of thunder. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the roof was a lonely, keening thing. It whipped around the corners of the building's utility structures, a mournful sound that echoed the cavernous emptiness that had just been blasted into Izuku Midoriya's chest. The air, thick with the perpetual haze of Muzurifu, felt thin in his lungs, as if he couldn't draw a full breath. Below, the city sprawled out, a vibrant tapestry of life and dreams, but from this height, it was just a silent, indifferent pattern of lights and shadows. Just moments ago, this rooftop had been the pinnacle of his entire existence. He had met All Might. The All Might, the symbol of peace, the pillar of their society, the smiling, indomitable hero who had been the sun in Izuku's sky for as long as he could remember. And for a few frantic, breathless seconds he had held on to a sliver of impossible hope. Then, the sun had set. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic. The words, spoken not with malice but with a tired, pragmatic pity that was somehow infinitely worse, ricocheted around the inside of his skull. Each syllable was a hammer blow, shattering the delicate glasswork of a dream he had painstakingly built for over a decade. He could still see the grim set of All Might's jaw, the weariness in his sunken eyes, the skeletal frame beneath the baggy clothes. The hero's truth was a harsh and ugly thing. Izuku's fingers were white-knuckled on the cool metal of the safety railing. He stared down, not with any dark intent, but simply because he didn't have the strength to look up at the vast, empty sky. His legs felt like leaden weights, his own body a foreign and useless object. He was a machine with a single purpose, and its primary component had just been declared defective beyond repair. Can I be a hero without a quirk? The question felt stupid now. Naive. A child's foolish plea to a world that had long since moved on from fairy tales. He had known the answer, hadn't he? He had known it every time Kaka's explosions left the smell of burnt sugar on his uniform. He had known it every time the teachers praised the powerful quirks of his classmates, while ignoring his diligent note-taking. He had known it in the doctor's sterile office, the single joint in his pinky toe a biological death sentence for his aspirations. He had known it in the tearful, soul-crushing apology of his own mother. "I'm so sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry!" He wished she had said something else. Anything else. He wished she had said, "Yes, you can!" Even if it was a lie. A lie would have been a shield. All Might had given him the truth, and the truth was a spear. A hollow, choked sound escaped his lips, half sob, half laugh. It was pathetic. He was pathetic. His hero analysis for the future, No. 13, the physical manifestation of all his hopes, lay a few feet away, its pages fluttering in the wind. The ink on the fresh autograph, the only good thing to happen today, seemed to mock him, a signature from the man who told him to give up. A worthless souvenir from the death of a dream. He finally pushed himself away from the railing, his movements stiff and jerky. He knelt and picked up the notebook, his fingers tracing the bold, confident lines of the hero's name. A part of him wanted to tear the page out, to rip the entire book to shreds and let the pieces scatter into the uncaring city below. But he couldn't. It was too much a part of him. To destroy it would be to destroy the last remnant of the boy he had been just 10 minutes ago. The door to the rooftop stairwell clanged shut. All Might was gone. The silence he left behind was absolute, broken only by the wind and the distant, constant hum of the city. Izuku Midoriya, for the first time in his life, felt completely and utterly alone. He didn't know how long he stood there, a small, green-haired statue of despair on an anonymous rooftop. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the sun beginning its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that felt like a cruel mockery of beauty. It was an explosion that finally broke the spell, a distant, percussive boom that was sharp and familiar, followed by a chorus of panic screams. Izuku's head snapped up, his hero-obsessed instincts, ingrained deeper than bone, overriding his misery for a single, critical second. He scrambled to the edge of the roof, his eyes scanning the streets below. A plume of black smoke was rising from a crowded shopping district a few blocks away. The very one he'd just come from. His heart, a leaden weight moments before, gave a painful, frantic lurch. A villain attack. He didn't think. He just moved. He wrenched the stairwell door open and clattered down the metal steps, his worn red sneakers slapping against the concrete. He burst out onto the street, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and self-loathing. Why am I running towards it? What can I possibly do? All Might said, he said to be a police officer. Maybe I can help them. Take notes? The excuses were flimsy, even to him. The truth was simpler. He was a moth, and that chaos was a flame. For his entire life, he had been drawn to it, and not even the crushing weight of reality could extinguish that pull. He arrived to a scene of utter chaos. A crowd was held back by a line of struggling heroes. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wooden limbs snaking through the panicked throng. The new hero, Empty Lady, was too big to navigate the narrow street. Backdraft was desperately trying to contain the fires that were spreading from detonated cars, and in the center of it all, writhing and expanding, was the sludge villain. The same villain that All Might had captured. The one Izuku had inadvertently let escape. A wave of nausea and guilt so powerful it made his knees weak washed over him. This is my fault. This is my fault. He escaped because I clung to All Might's leg. Because I was selfish. And then he saw it. Thrashing within the viscous, putrid body of the villain was a pair of terrified, furious red eyes. Spiky, ash-blonde hair. A school uniform identical to his own, Kaken. Katsuki Bakugo, the boy who had tormented him, the boy with the perfect quirk and the boundless ambition, the boy who had, just a few hours ago, told him to take a swan dive off the roof of a building, was suffocating. He was fighting, unleashing frantic, uncontrolled explosions that were doing more harm than good, setting the street ablaze and preventing the other heroes from getting close. But he was losing. Izuku could see the terror warring with the rage in his eyes. Izuku's blood ran cold. The world seemed to slow down, the roaring of the crowd and the crackling of the flames fading into a dull hum. He saw the heroes standing back, waiting for someone with the right quirk. He heard their hushed, anxious comments. Can't get a grip on him. The explosions are too dangerous. We just have to hold out until someone better suited arrives. And then, his eyes met All Might's. The hero was at the edge of the crowd, in his skeletal form, clutching his side. One hand was pressed to his mouth, a look of profound self-recrimination on his face. He was out of time. He was helpless. The symbol of peace was just another spectator. In that moment, Izuku Midoriya's mind went completely blank. The rooftop, the dream, the despair, it all vanished. There was only the here and now. A person was dying. A person he knew, and no one was doing anything. Before his brain could issue a single command, his legs were moving. He burst through the police line, a blur of green and black. He heard the heroes shout behind him, their voices distant and irrelevant. His world had shrunk to the narrow, fire-lined alley and the monstrous, thrashing form at its end. He wasn't thinking about being a hero. He wasn't thinking about quirks or quirklessness. He was just moving. What am I doing? A small, terrified part of his mind screamed. I'm going to die. I have no power. But his body didn't stop. His eyes darted around, analyzing, processing, the years of obsessive study taking over. Weaknesses? It has solid parts. The eyes and teeth. His bright yellow backpack felt heavy on his shoulders. Without a second thought, he swung it off and hurled it with all his might. It flew through the air, a clumsy, desperate projectile, and struck the villain square in the eye. The large, cartoonish eyeball recoiled, and for a fraction of a second, the villain's grip on Bakugo loosened. A gasp of air. That was all it was. But it was enough. Kaken! Izuku screamed, his voice raw as he clawed uselessly at the sludge encasing his classmate's body. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Bakugo roared, his voice muffled. Don't just stand there. You'll die. My legs just started moving. Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime and sweat. I don't know why. You looked like you were asking for help. That single, selfless, utterly insane act seemed to break something in the universe. It was a ripple in the fabric of fate, a deviation from the script. And it was noticed. Far beyond the smog-filled skies of Muzidifu, beyond the thin veil of Earth's atmosphere, beyond the cold, silent expanse of space and the very concept of physical dimensions, there was a place of impossible grandeur. It was not a mountain of rock and snow, but a peak of pure concept, a nexus of power and belief. Olympus. Here time did not flow, it simply was. Beings of immense, ancient power resided, their forms shaped by the fading echoes of mortal worship. For millennia, they had watched the world of men evolve, their creations and squabbles becoming increasingly alien. The rise of quirks had been a source of mild amusement, a planetary-wide, chaotic expression of latent potential that paled in comparison to true divine might. It was children playing with firecrackers in the shadow of a star. Seated on a throne carved from a captured nebula, a being of pure, thrumming energy held court. His form was humanoid only by convention, his flesh a canvas of roiling storm clouds, his beard a cascade of silver lightning, and his eyes twin galaxies of white-hot power. This was Zeus, the king, the Allfather, the Sky Lord. And he was bored. He watched the mortal realm as a man might watch an anthill. Their heroes, with their garish costumes and self-proclaimed titles, were a pale imitation of the demigods of old. They fought for fame, for money, for government approval. They had power, yes, but no glory. No Cleos. They lacked the fire, the divine madness, that had once made mortals interesting. His gaze, capable of piercing reality itself, drifted across the globe, skimming over wars, political summits, and natural disasters with equal disinterest. Then, something snagged his attention. A flicker. A spark of something he hadn't felt from a mortal in a very, very long time. He focused, his vision narrowing from the cosmic to the continental, from the continental to the metropolitan, until it rested on a single, unremarkable street in a city in Japan. He saw the sludge creature, a pathetic geospawn, hardly worthy of the name monster. He saw the so-called heroes, paralyzed by procedure and fear. He saw the boy with the power of an exploding star, trapped and terrified. And then he saw the other one. The small one. The one with no power at all. The one the universe itself screamed was insignificant. Quirkless, the world called him. A flaw. A zero. Zeus watched as this zero, this footnote in a world of superhumans, ran towards the danger. He watched as the boy's mind, devoid of any plan, gave way to an instinct so pure and ancient it resonated even here, on Olympus. It was the instinct to protect, the impulse to stand against overwhelming odds not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. It was the same spirit that had driven Perseus into the Gorgon's lair, that had compelled Heracles to face the Hydra, that had sent Achilles to the shores of Troy. It was the soul of a true hero. The king of the gods leaned forward on his throne, the cosmos swirling in his eyes. He saw past the boy's trembling limbs and tear-streaked face. He saw the brilliant, unwavering fire in his soul, a fire of self-sacrifice, of indomitable will, a power far greater than any genetic anomaly. In this world of manufactured heroes, here was a boy who embodied the classical ideal. A boy who, when faced with certain death, chose to act. A boy who, when told by the world's greatest champion that he was worthless, still found it within himself to try and save another. Such a fire should not be left to smolder in a world of ash, the thought rumbled, shaking the very foundations of Olympus. It deserves a weapon to wield. It deserves a sky to command. A slow, terrible, and magnificent smile spread across the Stormfather's face. He had found something. A vessel. A champion. A new thunderbolt to hurl into the stagnant world of man. He raised a hand, and within his palm, a miniature star of golden lightning began to coalesce, crackling with the power that had once brought titans to their knees. He had made his choice. Back on the street, reality came crashing back in. The sludge villain, enraged by the backpack to the eye, swatted Izuku away like a fly. He was thrown back, his head cracking against the pavement. The world swam in a dizzying blur. But his desperate act had bought the one thing that mattered, time. A booming laugh, familiar and powerful, echoed through the alley. I really am pathetic. All Might, his form suddenly swelling with muscle and power, stood between the villain and the boys. I preached the tenets of heroism, but I failed to live by them, he declared, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. He peeled Bakugo from the villain's grasp with impossible ease. The villain lunged, a massive, sludgy fist aimed at the hero. Detroit. Smayawash. The punch was a cataclysm. It didn't just strike the villain, it assaulted the very air itself. The barometric pressure shifted instantly. A supercompressed wind tunnel ripped through the alley, obliterating the villain into 1,000 splatters and extinguishing every last fire. The force continued upward, punching a hole in the clouds above, and then, it began to rain. Not a natural rain, but a consequence of the sudden, violent change in air pressure. Droplets fell on the scorched asphalt, on the cheering crowd, and on Izuku's stunned face. The aftermath was a blur. The heroes praised Bakugo for his bravery and powerful quirk. The paramedics checked Izuku for a concussion, tooting at his recklessness. The media swarmed All Might. Through it all, Izuku felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. He had been a catalyst, a trigger, but ultimately, he was irrelevant, an annotation in the story of a real hero. He was scolded by Kamui Woods and Death Arms for his foolishness, their words sharp and dismissive. No one praised him. No one thanked him. He had interfered. He had been a liability. He was the quirkless kid who got in the way. As he began the long, quiet walk home, the despair he'd felt on the rooftop returned, tenfold. It was a heavier, colder thing now, laced with the bitter tang of his own confirmed uselessness. He hadn't been a hero. He had been a victim who was lucky enough not to die. He was so lost in his own miserable thoughts that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a familiar voice boomed, "I am here." Izuku spun around to see All Might, steam rolling off his muscular form, jogging to a halt before him. "Young man," the hero began, his voice softer now. "I came to thank you, and to apologize. And also, to scold you." The conversation that followed was the one that should have happened on the rooftop. All Might admitted that Izuku's selfless act had inspired him to push past his limits. He saw the spirit of a true hero within the boy. "You, too, can become a hero." The words. The 6 words he had longed to hear his entire life. They were finally spoken by the one person whose opinion mattered most. But they landed with a dull, hollow thud in the empty space in his chest. A few hours ago, they would have reignited his world. Now, they felt like a posthumous medal, awarded to a corpse. He had seen the truth. He had seen All Might's limit, his weakness. He knew the hero was speaking to the spirit, not the reality. The reality was that Izuku was still quirkless, still powerless. It was a kind platitude, not a viable career path. He mumbled his thanks, his eyes fixed on the pavement, unable to meet the hero's gaze. He didn't hear the rest of what All Might said, something about a proposal, about his power. His mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. He was grateful, but he was also numb. The dream, once shattered, couldn't be so easily glued back together. He turned down a different street, not his usual route home. He couldn't face his mother yet. He couldn't face her worried expression or her questions. He needed to be alone. The path took him towards a small, slightly rundown city park, one he hadn't visited since he was a little kid. It was deserted at this hour, nestled between looming apartment complexes that blocked out the last of the evening light. The air grew strangely heavy, thick and humid. The light rain that had followed All Might's punch had stopped, but now the sky was darkening with an unnatural speed. The clouds were bruised, churning purple-black, unlike any storm front he had ever seen. The distant rumble of thunder wasn't a rumble. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He stood near an old oak tree in the center of the park, the world around him growing dim. The wind picked up again, but this was different from the rooftop wind. This wind was charged, electric. The hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stood on end. A metallic, ozone smell filled his nostrils, sharp and clean. He should have been scared. He should have run for cover. But he was too tired, too empty to care. He just stood there, a solitary figure in the deepening gloom, as the storm gathered its impossible fury directly overhead. There was no preliminary flicker, no warning flash. The world ceased to exist in a silent explosion of pure, white-hot light. A bolt of lightning, thicker than the trunk of the ancient oak tree and brighter than the sun, descended from the heavens. It was not the jagged, chaotic fork of a natural storm. This was a spear, a pillar of divine judgment hurled from the sky. It struck him not with a physical impact, but with a sense of absolute invasion. Pain was the first sensation, a searing, unimaginable agony as every nerve ending in his body screamed in protest. It felt as if he were being simultaneously burned and frozen, torn apart and forged anew on a cosmic anvil. But beneath the pain, there was something else. Power. A torrent of raw, untamed energy poured into him, a raging river flooding the dry, empty channels of his being. It was ancient, primal, and utterly overwhelming. His DNA felt like it was being unwritten and then rewritten in a language of thunder and light. And then came the voice. It was not a sound he heard with his ears, but a declaration that bloomed in the core of his consciousness. It was the crack of a billion lightning bolts, the grinding of tectonic plates, and the roar of a supernova all at once. It was a voice that commanded obedience, a voice that had shaped worlds. You are worthy. His mind reeled, the single thought a life raft in an ocean of incandescent agony. Worthy? This world of petty powers has forgotten true strength. It has forgot the glory of the hero's soul. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories, but an inheritance. He saw bronze-clad warriors facing down hydras, heroes sailing on wine-dark seas, and mortals challenging the gods themselves. They cast you out. They called you nothing. I, who am all, say otherwise. You, who were nothing, shall become my will made flesh. The power surged, reaching a crescendo. Golden energy, the color of the sun's corona, arced across his skin, charring the grass in a perfect circle around him. His green eyes, wide with terror and awe, began to glow with a brilliant, internal light, shifting from emerald to a molten, electric gold. Wield my fury. Be my champion. Show this world what true power is. The voice receded, leaving behind a final, resonant command that was seared into his very soul. The agonizing torrent of energy subsided, not vanishing, but settling deep within him, a coiled serpent of lightning waiting in the marrow of his bones. The world, which had been a symphony of pain and power, went utterly silent. The light in his eyes faded. The strength left his limbs, his body having reached its mortal limit. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who had been chosen by a god, crumpled to the scorched earth and knew no more. The first thing Izuku became aware of was the smell. It was the scent of a summer storm's aftermath, wet earth, scorched ozone, and the clean, sharp fragrance of rain-washed air. It was a smell that didn't belong in his all-might-themed bedroom. His eyelids were heavy, glued shut with a gritty exhaustion that felt bone-deep. He groaned, a low, pained sound, and tried to shift. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, a chorus of aches and pains that felt less like he'd been struck by lightning and more like he'd been trampled by a herd of rhinos. A cool, damp cloth was pressed gently to his forehead. Izuku? Oh, thank goodness you're awake, his mother's voice. It was thick with unshed tears and stretched thin with worry. With a monumental effort he managed to pry his eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly. He was in his own bed, the familiar Silver Age All Might posters looking down on him. His mother, Inko Midoriya, was perched on the edge of the mattress, her face pale and her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen there before. Mom? What happened? He rasped, his throat feeling like sandpaper. Inko's composure crumbled. A sob escaped her, and she wrapped her arms around him, her touch careful, as if he were made of fragile glass. I was so worried. I called and called, and you didn't answer. I went to look for you, and I found you in the park. Just lying there. The ground was all burned in a circle around you. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. Izuku, what happened to you? The memories came rushing back in a dizzying, terrifying flood. The rooftop. The despair. The sludge villain. Kakin. All Might. The lonely walk. The unnatural storm. The pillar of light. The voice. You are worthy. He flinched, the memory of the voice so vivid it felt like it was still echoing in his skull. It couldn't be real. It was impossible. A dream. A hallucination. He must have been struck by a regular bolt of lightning. The stress of the day, the near-death experience, the concussion the paramedics had mentioned, it must have all conspired to create a vivid, horrifying fever dream. That had to be it. I think I was struck by lightning, Mom, he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a partial truth, at least. I don't really remember much. Inko's expression shifted from terror to a frantic, motherly concern. She fussed over him, checking his temperature, forcing a glass of water into his hands. She told him the doctors at the hospital had been baffled. They'd found no entry or exit wounds, no severe burns, just extreme muscular exhaustion and elevated electrolyte levels. They'd kept him overnight for observation and released him this morning, chalking it up to a 1 in a billion miracle. For the next few days, Izuku tried to force himself to believe the lie. He went through the motions of his life, his body slowly recovering from the aches. But his mind was a turbulent sea of doubt and fear. The dream, the voice, the sheer feeling of that power, it clung to him like a second skin. He felt different. There was a low-level hum beneath his skin, a constant thrum of energy he could feel in the quiet moments before sleep. It was like the buzz of a high-voltage power line, a silent song only he could hear. He dismissed it as a phantom sensation, a lingering neurological symptom from the lightning strike. He was wrong. It was a week after the incident. He was in his room, ostensibly studying, but his mind was elsewhere. A news report was playing on his phone, a retrospective on the sludge villain attack. It showed footage of Bakugo, his expression grim and defiant, receiving praise from heroes for his fighting spirit. Then, the reporter mentioned the reckless, quirkless middle schooler whose interference had complicated the situation. They didn't use his name, but they didn't have to. The words were barbs, sinking into the raw wound of his insecurity. A familiar, hot surge of frustration and anger washed over him. It was the same old story. Kaken was brave. He was a liability. Kaken's power was celebrated. His powerlessness was a crime. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, his teeth grinding. It's not fair. The thought screamed in his mind. I was just trying to help. Crack. The all-night lamp on his desk didn't just flicker. The light bulb inside exploded with a sharp bang, showering the desk with tiny shards of glass. Simultaneously, the phone in his hand gave a violent buzz, and the screen, which had been perfectly intact, spiderwebbed with 1,000 tiny fractures radiating from his thumbprint. A tingling, pins and needles sensation raced up his arm, leaving the scent of ozone in its wake. Izuku froze, his breath hitched in his throat. He stared at the destroyed light bulb. He stared at his ruined phone. He slowly unclenched his fist. The humming beneath his skin, which had spiked into a loud thrum, slowly subsided back to its baseline buzz. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. The voice. The power. The lightning. It was real. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror, colder and more profound than any he had ever felt, washed over him. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were biological, a part of you, like an extra limb, or the ability to breathe fire. This was something else. This was an alien entity residing inside him, a storm in a bottle, and the bottle was his own fragile, quirkless body. And he had absolutely no idea how to control it. That night, he couldn't sleep. The humming was a constant companion, a reminder of the volatile power coiling in his blood. The next morning, he went to his bookshelf, past the rows and rows of hero analysis journals, and pulled out a fresh, empty notebook. He stared at the blank cover for a long time before writing, his hand shaking slightly. Analysis of My Power. Volume 1. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam were the most terrifying, frustrating, and secretive period of his life. His existence became a series of frantic, low-stakes experiments and desperate attempts at control. His new journal filled with chaotic, half-mad scribbles. Entry 3. Power appears to be directly linked to emotional state. Anger seems to be the most potent trigger. Tried to replicate the feeling from the news report. Result: blew out the fuse for the entire apartment. Mom thinks it was a power surge. Must be more careful. Entry 7. Static electricity generation is off the charts. Touched the metal doorknob this morning and sent a visible blue arc a centimeter long. Shock was strong enough to make my teeth hurt. Now wearing rubber-soled slippers at all times indoors. Entry 15. Tried to channel it consciously. Focused on the humming sensation in my chest. Felt a warmth spread through my hand. The TV remote I was holding melted. Note: power has a thermal component, extremely destructive. His life became a minefield. He couldn't get too excited watching hero fights online without causing the Wi-Fi router to reboot. He couldn't get frustrated with his homework without his laptop screen flickering ominously. He accidentally shocked his mother once when handing her a plate, a small jolt that made her yelp and left him shaking with guilt for hours. He learned to exist in a state of forced placidity, meditating, practicing breathing exercises, anything to keep the storm within him from raging. He was a living electrical fault, and the pressure was immense. He had to hide it all from his mother, who was already a bundle of nerves. He'd tell her his new quirk was just a bit unstable, a common issue for late bloomers. He knew she didn't fully believe him, but she didn't press, her love for him overriding her suspicion with a worried acceptance. He also knew that control wasn't enough. If the power was a raging river, his body was a flimsy dam. He remembered the bone-deep exhaustion after the initial event. He needed to get stronger. So, alongside his frantic attempts to control the lightning, he began a grueling physical regimen. He ran until his lungs burned, did push-ups until his arms gave out, and lifted weights he scavenged from online marketplaces. This wasn't about earning up power anymore. It was about surviving the one he'd been given, but meditation and push-ups could only take him so far. He couldn't truly understand his limits without letting the power out, and his small apartment was the worst possible place for that. He needed somewhere deserted, somewhere he could unleash the storm without hurting anyone or causing a citywide blackout. His mind immediately went to one place, Dagoba Municipal Beach. The place was a monument to public apathy. Once a beautiful stretch of coastline, it had become an unofficial landfill, choked with decades of illegally dumped trash, from rusted appliances to mountains of broken furniture. No one ever went there. It was perfect. Under the guise of quirk training, he started going to the beach every evening. The first time he truly tried to call upon the power, he stood amidst the heaps of junk, the setting sun casting long shadows, and focused. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world and turning his senses inward. He reached for the hum, the coiled serpent of energy in his chest. He thought back to the park, to the feeling of that divine energy pouring into him, to the memory of the voice. Wield my fury. He felt a familiar tingle start in his fingers. The air around him grew heavy, charged with static. The metallic scent of ozone, his constant companion, grew stronger. He opened his eyes, now glowing with a faint golden light, and extended a trembling hand towards a mountain of discarded washing machines and refrigerators. He pulled. Not with his muscles, but with his will. He tried to draw the lightning out, to shape it into something manageable. The result was anything but. It was not a bolt or a stream. It was a raw, uncontrolled detonation of power. A shotgun blast of golden electrical fury erupted from his body, not just his hand. It tore a 10-meter-long, 2-meter-deep trench in the sand and garbage in front of him. Rusted metal vaporized on contact. The sound was a deafening crack boom that was far louder than any of Bakugo's explosions. The shockwave threw him backward, and he landed hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him. He lay there, gasping for air, his ears ringing, his body screaming in protest. The trench before him smoldered, the sand fused into glassy fulgurites. He had done that. Awe and terror warred within him. The sheer, untamed magnitude of the power was beyond anything he could have imagined. This wasn't just a quirk. It was a force of nature. And it was inside him. He didn't know he was being watched. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal, almost cadaverous form, coughed into his fist, a fleck of blood staining his knuckles. He leaned against a pile of discarded tires at the edge of the beach park, the sea breeze doing little to soothe the chronic ache in his side. He'd been coming here for a few weeks now. It was quiet, and the endless task of clearing the beach gave him something to focus on besides his own dwindling time. But tonight, his motive was different. He was here to watch. He hadn't been able to get the Midoriya boy out of his head. The boy's reckless, suicidal bravery at the sludge incident had been a harsh mirror, reflecting Toshinori's own complacency. and his words on the rooftop. "It's not bad to dream, but you have to be realistic," had soured in his memory, tasting like hypocrisy. He had been looking for a successor, someone with a heroic spirit, and when one had literally thrown himself at his feet, he had swatted him away. He had intended to find the boy again, to correct his mistake, to make the offer of one for all. Then, he had heard the rumors. A late bloomer. The Midoriya boy, the one officially registered as quirkless, had apparently manifested a powerful one, if the whispers from his middle school were to be believed. Toshinori was more than skeptical, he was deeply concerned. Quirkless people didn't just suddenly develop quirks at 14, it was a biological impossibility. The only known mechanism for such a thing was all for one. The thought sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. Had his nemesis gotten to the boy? Had he forced some volatile, unstable quirk upon him as a cruel joke or for some darker purpose? Toshinori had to know. So he had followed him, discreetly, to this junkyard of a beach. He had watched the boy stand there, his small frame looking lost amidst the mountains of trash. He had seen the air begin to shimmer around him, seen the faint, unsettling golden light in his eyes. He had braced himself, expecting something. A burst of energy, maybe some minor telekinesis. What he got was an apocalypse in miniature. The explosion of light and sound was so violent, so powerful, that Toshinori instinctively flinched back, raising a bony arm to shield his face. The sheer destructive output was staggering. It wasn't the focused, kinetic force of one for all. It was wilder. More elemental. He'd seen heroes with powerful electrical quirks. Kaminari from UA was a prime example, but their power was like a taser compared to this. This was a bolt from the heavens. It was primal. It felt ancient. His mind reeled. This was not a quirk given by All for One. He knew what those felt like, the discordant wrongness of a stolen and implanted power. This was something else entirely. Something new. He watched as the boy struggled to his feet, swaying, his face pale with shock and exhaustion. He looked terrified of his own power. Toshinori's concern shifted from suspicion to a deep, paternal worry. A boy with that much power and that little control was a danger to himself, and everyone around him. He stepped out from behind the tires, his tall, gaunt frame looking like a specter in the twilight. Young Midoriya. Izuku whipped around, his eyes wide with panic. He saw the skeletal figure and for a second, he didn't recognize him. Then, the piercing blue eyes, the ones that held the same fire regardless of his form, registered. All Might? He stammered, frantically trying to look innocent, as if he hadn't just carved a crater in the landscape. What are you doing here? Toshinori walked closer, his gaze fixed on the smoldering trench, then back to the boy. He decided to forego any pretense. I should ask you the same thing, he said, his voice a low rumble. That was quite the display. I was under the impression you were quirkless. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He was caught. His mind raced, desperately trying to find a plausible explanation that wasn't. I was chosen by the Greek god Zeus to be his divine champion. He fell back on the only lie he had. It's a late bloomer quirk, he said, the words feeling flimsy and transparent even as he spoke them. It only just manifested. I don't know how to control it yet. That's why I came here, where I wouldn't hurt anyone. Toshinori stared at him for a long, silent moment. His gaze was unerringly sharp, as if he could see right through the lie, right into the terrified, storm-filled core of Izuku's soul. He knew it wasn't a late bloomer quirk. The energy signature was all wrong. It felt purer, more fundamental than any quirk he had ever encountered. But he also saw the truth in the boy's eyes, the genuine fear, the desperation, and the unwavering resolve to protect others, even from himself. This wasn't the look of a villain's pawn. This was the look of a hero struggling with a terrible burden. He had misjudged this boy once before. He wouldn't do it again. The origin of the power didn't matter as much as the heart of the one who wielded it. A late bloomer, Toshinori repeated slowly, a thoughtful, calculating look on his face. He let the lie hang in the air, choosing to accept it for now. A power like that, it must feel like holding a lightning storm in your hands. Izuku flinched at the accuracy of the statement, nodding dumbly. "You're going about it all wrong," All Might continued, gesturing at the trench. "You tried to force it, to command it. But a power like that, a force of nature, you can't command a storm, my boy. You can't tell the tide when to turn. You can only learn to guide it, to predict it, to give it a safe path to follow." He walked over to a rusted, derelict refrigerator and placed a hand on it. "Most quirks are like a muscle. You train them, they get stronger and more precise. Yours—" He paused, looking at Izuku. "Yours feels different. It feels like the container is the problem. Your body. You are trying to channel a river through a garden hose. The hose is going to burst." Izuku stared, mesmerized. All Might didn't understand what the power was, but he understood its nature with an instinctual clarity that left him breathless. "You've been training your body, that's good," Toshinori said, noticing the boy's improved physique. "That's the first step. You need to make the container stronger. But you also need to train your focus. Instead of trying to unleash a flood, start with a single drop. Try to feel the energy inside you. Don't push it out. Just let it gather. Hold it. Coax it. Start small. Try to make a single spark between your fingers. If you can do that, you can learn to make a spark anywhere. And if you can make a spark, eventually, you can make a lightning bolt." He was offering him guidance. The symbol of peace, the #1 hero, was offering to help him. Not by giving him a power, but by helping him manage the terrifying one he already had. A wave of profound relief and gratitude washed over Izuku, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He wasn't alone in this anymore. "Why?" Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" Toshinori turned to face him, the setting sun catching his face, making his sunken eyes seem to glow. "Because, young Midoriya," he said, his voice losing its instructional tone and becoming something warmer, something full of a conviction that resonated deep in Izuku's soul. "On the day we met, I told you that you couldn't be a hero. And then, mere hours later, with no power to your name, you showed me what being a hero truly means. I was wrong about you. I will not make that mistake again." He smiled, a small, tired, but genuine smile. "Now let's get to work. The UE exam is in 10 months. If you want to get in, you need to learn how to light a candle without burning down the whole city." For the first time since that fateful day, a spark of genuine, unadulterated hope ignited in Izuku Midoriya's chest. It was a terrifying, uncertain path ahead, but with the symbol of peace, confused as he was, in his corner, Izuku felt that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to tame the storm within. The 10 months that followed were a crucible, forging Izuku Midoriya into someone new. His life became a relentless cycle of sunrise runs, mind-numbing coursework, grueling physical training with All Might, and secretive, terrifying sessions of power control. The Dagoba Beach became his sanctuary and his proving ground. Under Toshinori's watchful, often bewildered eye, he slowly, painstakingly, began the impossible task of taming a god's fury. Toshinori's advice had been a Rosetta Stone for the chaotic language of his new power. Don't command, guide. Start with a drop, not a flood. The words became his mantra. The first time he successfully created a sustained spark between his thumb and forefinger. A tiny, buzzing, golden star no bigger than a grain of rice. He had cried with relief. It was a pathetic display compared to the crater he'd carved on his first day, but it was a victory of control, not brute force. It was everything. From that single spark, he progressed. He learned to channel the energy through his body without it erupting uncontrollably. He spent weeks learning to coat his hand in a thin, harmless aura of static electricity, picking up paperclips from a distance. He moved on to charging small batteries, then to creating small, controlled electromagnetic pulses that could disable a discarded remote control. Each success was a hard-won battle against the storm raging within him. His physical training, meanwhile, was brutal. Toshinori, in his all-might form, would set up impossible tasks, moving mountains of scrap metal, hauling derelict cars across the sand, all while Izuku had to maintain a low, steady output of his electrical power. The dual strain pushed his body to its absolute limits, and beyond. He built lean, dense muscle, his frame hardening from a boy's soft lines into the taut, corded physique of an athlete. He was still small, but he was no longer weak. The container was getting stronger. He also discovered new facets of his power. One day, while dodging a piece of falling scrap, he instinctively tried to push himself away with a burst of energy. Instead of an explosion, a focused jolt of lightning shot from his feet, propelling him sideways in a blur of motion that was faster than his eye could track. He stumbled, crashing into a pile of tires, his heart hammering. They'd spent the next month trying to replicate it, eventually dubbing it the Lightning Dash. It was incredibly draining and difficult to control, but it gave him a mobility that was almost supernatural. By the end of the 10 months, Dagoba Beach was pristine, its sands clean for the first time in decades. And Izuku was transformed. The stuttering, chronically anxious boy was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but he was now overlaid with a quiet, hard-won confidence. It wasn't the confidence of someone who knew he was the strongest. It was the confidence of a bomb disposal expert who finally knew which wires to cut. He was still terrified of the explosive power he held, but he was no longer helpless before it. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, he stood before the colossal gates of the most prestigious Hero Academy in Japan. He took a deep, steadying breath, the air humming with the nervous energy of hundreds of other hopefuls. He could feel the low-level thrum of his own power in his veins, a familiar companion now. It was calm, quiescent, waiting for his call. He wasn't here hoping for a miracle. He was here to demonstrate his control. A familiar, abrasive voice cut through the crowd's murmur. "Get out of my way, Deku." Izuku turned to see Katsuki Bakugo striding towards him, his hands shoved in his pockets, a thunderous scowl etched onto his face. The past 10 months had been strange between them. Bakugo had seen Izuku at the beach a few times, had witnessed his grueling training, but had never confronted him. He just watched from a distance, his expression a mixture of confusion, anger, and something Izuku couldn't quite identify. "Keikaken! Good morning! Let's both do our best," Izuku started, his old habits dying hard. "Don't talk to me," Bakugo snarled, shoving past him without a second glance. "Just stay the hell out of my way, you damn pebble." Izuku watched him go, a small sigh escaping his lips. Some things never changed, but as he looked down at his own hands, he felt a flicker of the golden energy dance across his knuckles for a brief, controlled second. He's not seeing a pebble anymore, he thought. He just doesn't know what he's looking at yet. He took a step forward and immediately stumbled, his foot catching on an uneven flagstone. He flailed, gravity taking over, a clumsy start to the most important day of his life. Before he could hit the ground, a gentle hand touched his shoulder, and the sensation of falling abruptly stopped. He felt weightless. "Whoa there! Are you okay?" a cheerful, bright voice asked. He looked up to see a girl with a round, kind face and rosy cheeks, her brown hair cut into a neat bob. She had her hand extended, her pinky finger raised. "Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking, but it's a bad omen to fall, right?" Why yeah. Thanks," Izuku stammered, his face flushing. She gently lowered him back to the ground. "Well, good luck in there," she said with a warm smile before heading towards the gate. "Why you too?" he called after her, his heart doing a nervous flutter kick. His anxiety was still there, but beneath it was a bedrock of readiness. He squared his shoulders and walked through the gates of UA High School. The written exam was challenging but manageable. Izuku's obsessive studying habits paid off, and he felt confident he had done well. The real test, however, was yet to come. He found himself in a massive auditorium with the other examinees, the lights dimming as the voice hero, Present Mike, exploded onto the stage. The hero's high-energy explanation of the practical exam washed over him. 3 types of villain bots, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. The goal was to use their quirks to immobilize as many as possible within the time limit. As Present Mike was wrapping up, a tall, serious-looking boy with engines in his calves stood up to ask a question about a 4th type of robot on the handout, a massive arena trap worth 0 points. Izuku recognized him from the gate. The boy then turned and pointed a rigid finger directly at him. "And you, with the curly hair. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave," Izuku squeaked, hunching his shoulders as dozens of heads turned to look at him. Old habits. He had been subconsciously analyzing present mixed speech, cross-referencing it with what he knew about UA's past exams, his mouth moving without his permission. Sorry. He mumbled, his face burning. He barely registered present mixed answer about the 0-pointer being an obstacle to be avoided. His focus was singular. Control. Precision. Don't cause a blackout. Don't level the city block. Just pass. They were herded onto buses and taken to a sprawling, realistic mock cityscape. Battle Center B. He was in a different arena from Bakugo, which was both a relief and a disappointment. He was also separated from the kind girl from the gate. He stood before the massive doors, stretching his limbs, feeling the electric hum in his blood quicken with anticipation. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and pictured a calm lake, a technique Toshinori had taught him to help center his emotions. Start. Present mixed voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other examinees looked around in confusion. What's wrong? There's no countdown in a real fight. But Izuku was already gone. The moment the word start hit his ears, he didn't hesitate. He channeled a small, precise burst of power to his feet. He didn't erupt in a flash of lightning. It was more subtle. A faint shimmer in the air, a crackle of static like a needle dropping on a vinyl record, and he was off. The lightning dash was no longer a wild, uncontrollable lurch. It was a series of short, controlled bursts, allowing him to cover ground at a blistering pace. He shot past the still hesitating crowd, a green blur moving with an unnatural, stutter-step rhythm. He was the first to enter the city, and the first to encounter the robots. A one-pointer rolled out from an alleyway, its single red eye locking onto him. Target acquired, it droned, raising a metallic claw. Izuku didn't slow down. He didn't need a destructive blast. He needed efficiency. He held out his hand, palm open. A small, concentrated ball of golden energy, no bigger than a marble, formed in his palm. It wasn't lightning, it was a focused electromagnetic pulse. As he dashed past the robot, he slapped his hand against its chassis. The EMP discharged. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It seized up, its joints locking as its internal circuitry was fried into slag. It stood frozen, immobilized. 1 point. He rounded a corner and came upon a group of 3 two-pointers. Smashing them would take too long and waste energy. He needed a different approach. He held up both hands, spreading his fingers wide. This time, he didn't focus the energy into a pulse. He let it arc outwards, weaving a net of crackling golden lightning between his hands. He ran straight towards the robots, and as their laser sights painted his chest, he thrust the electric net forward. The arcs of lightning leaped from his hands to the nearest robot, then chained to the second, and then the third, linking them all in a circuit of paralyzing energy. The robots convulsed, their motors whining and shorting out before they all fell silent, smoke pouring from their joints. 6 more points. 7 total. Time elapsed, 30 seconds. This was his style. Not the overwhelming, earth-shattering power of All Might, but something else entirely. He was a storm, yes, but a controlled one. He was the precise, surgical strike of a lightning bolt, not the chaotic destruction of a hurricane. In a darkened monitoring room, the faculty of UA watched the feeds from the various battle centers. The screens glowed, showing a chaotic montage of explosions, ice walls, laser beams, and stretching limbs. That Bakugo kid in Battle Center A has incredible offensive power, a pro-hero commented. Aggressive, but effective. He's already racked up over 40 points. The recommendation students are performing as expected, Principal Nizu noted, his beady eyes darting between the monitors. Aizawa Shota, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, let out a tired sigh. He was already bored. It was the same thing every year, a bunch of kids with flashy, powerful quirks blowing things up. He was more interested in spotting the ones with real potential, the ones who thought strategically, the ones who had something more than just brute force. His gaze drifted to the monitors for Battle Center B. Most of the action was clustered, kids fighting over the same groups of robots. But his sharp eyes caught a flicker of movement on the periphery, a green-clad examinee moving far faster than the rest, almost teleporting in short bursts. Cementos, zoom in on grid D4, he said, his voice a low monotone. The main screen shifted, focusing on Izuku. The teachers watched as he zipped through an alley, evading a three-pointer's pincer attack. He didn't meet it head-on. Instead, he slid underneath it, placing one hand on the street and the other on the robot's undercarriage. A controlled, high-voltage shock passed through the robot, using the damp asphalt as a ground. The three-pointer shuddered to a halt, its optical sensors dark. "Who is that?" Midnight asked, leaning forward with interest. "His quirk seems to be some kind of electrification, but his speed is incredible. Name is Izuku Midoriya," Niza read from a tablet. "His file is unusual. Registered as quirkless until 10 months ago. He's claiming a late manifestation." Aizawa's eyes narrowed. "A quirk that powerful, manifesting at 14? And he's using it with that level of precision and strategic thinking? Unlikely. He'd seen late bloomers before. They were clumsy, overwhelmed, barely able to control their newfound abilities. This kid moved with the practiced ease of someone who had trained for years. Something wasn't right. On the screen, Izuku took down another pair of robots, his point total climbing steadily. 21. 28. 35. 42. He was efficient, almost silent, a ghost of golden lightning flitting through the battlefield, leaving a trail of disabled machines in his wake. He wasn't just destroying them. He was dismantling them with surgical precision, exploiting their mechanical nature. "He's not just using his quirk," Aizawa mused aloud, a flicker of genuine interest in his tired eyes. "He's thinking. He's analyzing his opponents and applying his power in the most efficient way possible. He's conserving energy," the other teachers murmured in agreement. This was different. This wasn't the blind flailing of a teenager with a new toy. This was the work of a pro. Izuku's lungs burned. The constant use of his power, even in controlled bursts, was taking its toll. Every lightning dash left a faint ache in his legs, and every EMP felt like a small part of him was being drained away. He had racked up 58 points, a respectable score, but he was starting to feel the strain. The initial reservoir of energy he'd built up was running low. 6 minutes 2 seconds left. President Mick's voice echoed through the city. He needed to find more robots, but the main streets seemed to have been cleared out by the other, more destructive examinees. He ducked into a side street, hoping to find a few stragglers. The street was empty of bots, but not of people. The kind girl from the entrance exam, the one with the gravity quirk, was sitting on the ground, breathing heavily. She looked pale and seemed to be fighting off nausea. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, jogging over to her. "Oh, hi," she said, giving him a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm okay. My quirk just makes me a little queasy if I overuse it. My point total is not great." She looked down at her hands. "I'm better at rescue than combat." Before Izuku could offer a word of encouragement, the ground began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble vibrated through the concrete, growing louder with each passing second. A shadow fell over them, vast and absolute, eclipsing the artificial sun of the arena. Both of them looked up. And up. And up. The zero-pointer. It was a titan. A monster of metal and hydraulics that towered over the 20-story buildings around it. Its massive form was a chaotic jumble of tank treads, armor plating, and countless wires, its head a single, glowing red sensor that swept across the cityscape. It was less a robot and more a mobile skyscraper designed for destruction. "That's the one President Mike said to avoid." The girl squeaked, scrambling to her feet. Examinees began to stream past them, a panicked exodus away from the colossal machine. "Run for it! It's not worth any points. We can't fight that thing." Izuku knew they were right. It was an obstacle, a test of risk assessment. The smart move was to run, to find more point-bearing robots in the remaining time. He turned to flee with the others, but then he heard a small cry of pain. He looked back. The girl, Uraraka, he would later learn her name was, had tripped again. Her ankle was caught under a piece of rubble that had been dislodged by the robot's earth-shaking advance. She was trapped, directly in its path. The world went silent. The panicked shouts of the other students, the grinding of the robot's machinery, his own ragged breathing, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All he could see was a person in trouble. A person who had been kind to him. And no one was turning back to help. The rooftop. The sludge villain. Kakin's terrified eyes. My legs just started moving. This time, it wasn't just his legs. His entire being, every fiber of his being, every circuit of the divine power within him, made the decision for him. He turned back, running towards the danger, towards the titan of steel. Hey! Uraraka yelled, her eyes wide with terror. What are you doing? Run! He ignored her, his mind racing, calculating, analyzing. The EMPs he'd been using wouldn't scratch it. A surface-level shock would be useless. The lightning dash was for movement, not offense. Smashing it with his fists was out of the question. He needed more. He needed something on a completely different scale. He remembered Toshinori's words from months ago, after a training session had gone particularly badly, leaving him frustrated and drained. This power feels like it wants to connect with something bigger. It feels like it's drawn to the sky. He looked up. The artificial sky of the arena was a placid, cloudless blue. But he could feel the moisture in the air, the static charge, the latent energy all around him. He remembered the voice in the park. Wield my fury. He had learned to make a spark. Now, he had to call the storm. He stopped, planting his feet wide, about 30 meters from the approaching zero-pointer. He closed his eyes and reached inward, not for the calm lake, but for the raging, thundering tempest he had kept locked away. He opened the floodgates. Energy, raw and golden, exploded from him. It wasn't a weapon, it was a beacon. A call. The air around him crackled and ionized, the smell of ozone becoming overpowering. The sky above Battle Center B, which had been a perfect, manufactured blue, began to darken. Small, wispy clouds coalesced from nothing, swirling and growing at an impossible rate, churning into a dark, angry thunderhead directly above the zero-pointer. The other examinees, who had been fleeing, stopped and stared in disbelief. The proctors in the monitoring room leaned forward as one, their jaws slack. What is he doing? Aizawa breathed, his eyes wide. Izuku's own eyes snapped open. They were no longer green. They were solid, blazing orbs of gold, conduits of a power far older than quirks. He felt the connection, a tangible line of force between himself and the storm he had just summoned. The power wasn't just in him anymore. He was a part of it, a temporary anchor for a celestial force. He bent his knees, channeling every ounce of his remaining energy, every spark of the god's gift, into his legs. He didn't just dash. He launched himself into the air, propelled by a controlled, continuous blast of lightning from his feet. He shot upwards like a rocket, soaring past the robot's torso, past its shoulders, until he was level with its massive head. He hung there for a moment, suspended between the earth and the heavens, the eye of his own personal storm. He raised one hand to the sky. Come, he roared, his voice imbued with a power that was not his own, a voice that cracked like thunder. As if in answer, the thunderhead above him unleashed its payload. A dozen forks of jagged, natural lightning converged on his outstretched hand. They did not strike him, they were drawn into him. He became a living lightning rod, a nexus of divine and atmospheric energy. The power was blinding, deafening, utterly apocalyptic. It was more than he had ever tried to channel, 1,000 times more. It was agony and ecstasy, threatening to tear his mortal body apart. He gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming as he fought to contain the celestial inferno. He drew his other arm back, the captured lightning coalescing around his fist, encasing it in a blinding gauntlet of pure, white-hot energy. He aimed for the robot's single, massive red eye. This wasn't a smash. This was a judgment. Karanos! He screamed, the ancient Greek word for a thunderbolt ripped from a place in his soul he didn't know existed. He punched. The world vanished in a flash of white. The thunderbolt, a concentrated spear of divine lightning, erupted from his fist. It struck the zero-pointer's head with the force of an artillery shell. The massive sensor shattered, and the bolt didn't stop. It pierced through the armor plating, through the internal mechanisms, and out the back of the robot's head, continuing its journey to the ground where it struck the pavement, blasting a 10-foot crater in the solid concrete. For a moment, the zero-pointer just stood there, a hole of molten, slagged metal bored clean through its head. Then, with a groan of tortured steel, its lights flickered and died. The titan of the arena, the unbeatable obstacle, began to fall. It tipped forward, its immense weight threatening to crush the still trapped Uraraka. The divine power receded from Izuku as quickly as it had come, leaving him with nothing but a profound, debilitating exhaustion. The light in his eyes faded back to green. He was just a boy again, hanging in the air, 1,000 feet above the ground, with no power left to stop his fall. Gravity reasserted its claim, and he began to plummet. He saw the robot falling. He saw the girl, her face a mask of terror. He didn't have the strength to scream. At least, I saved her, was his last coherent thought before his vision started to tunnel. Just before he blacked out, he felt a slap against his cheek and the familiar, nauseating sensation of weightlessness. Uraraka, having freed herself from the rubble, had used her quirk on him, saving him from becoming a crater on the pavement. She brought him down gently, just as the colossal robot crashed to the ground a safe distance away, shaking the entire city block. And that's time! Present Mick's voice roared, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay on the ground, his body a universe of pain, every muscle fiber feeling like it had been shredded and burned. He was completely and utterly spent. He had 58 villain points, but as he looked at the stunned, awestruck faces of the other examinees, and the colossal, smoking ruin of the zero-pointer, he knew he had earned something more. Rescue points. In the monitoring room, the silence was absolute. The pro-heroes stared at the screen, at the boy being attended to by Recovery Girl, at the impossible storm clouds that were already beginning to dissipate. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall, his usual apathy completely gone, replaced by an expression of intense, almost fearful, curiosity. Mizu, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I don't care what his file says. I want that kid in my class. The week between the entrance exam and the arrival of the acceptance letter was a unique form of torture. Izuku spent most of it in a state of profound, aching exhaustion. The stunt he'd pulled with the zero-pointer had pushed his body far beyond its previously known limits. It wasn't just the physical strain of channeling that much power. It was a deeper, more fundamental depletion, as if his very life force had been siphoned to fuel the cataclysmic bolt. He slept for nearly 2 days straight, and even after waking, a persistent lethargy clung to him like a shroud. Recovery Girl's initial assessment had been a mixture of bafflement and stern disapproval. Broken bones I can heal, torn ligaments are a simple fix, she had chided, giving him a kiss that knitted his strained muscles back together. But this is systemic energy depletion on a cellular level. It's like you ran a marathon with every cell in your body. Don't you ever do something that reckless again, young man. The warning, however, was secondary to the result. He had done it. He had saved the girl. He had faced an impossible obstacle, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he had commanded the heavens. The memory was a dizzying cocktail of pride and absolute terror. The power he wielded was not a tool he could simply pick up and put down. It was a symbiotic force, and using its upper echelons came at a staggering cost. When the letter from UA finally arrived, his hands trembled so much he could barely open the envelope. The projection disc fell onto his desk, and a holographic image of All Might flickered to life. I am here. As a projection. The hero boomed. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, as All Might explained the scoring system. He watched the footage of his exam, the lightning dashes, the precise EMP strikes. He had passed the written portion with flying colors and had accumulated a respectable 58 villain points. A fine score, enough to pass on its own, All Might said, his holographic image giving a thumbs up. But that is not all. A hero course judges more than just the destruction of villains. The screen then showed the final, dramatic moments of the exam. It showed Uraraka trapped, the other students fleeing, and his own small figure turning back to face the zero-pointer. It showed him summoning the storm, the impossible ascent, and the final, apocalyptic thunderbolt. Self-sacrifice for the sake of others. The desire to rush in and save those in peril. That is the most fundamental quality of a hero. All Might's voice swelled with pride. The UA entrance exam is not just about points. We also award rescue points. Izuku Midoriya, you have been awarded 60 rescue points. For a total of 118 points, placing you first overall. The hologram shifted to show the scoreboard. His name, Izuku Midoriya, was at the very top, blazing like a star. Bakugo was in second place with 77 points. Come, young Midoriya, All Might concluded, his voice softening. This is your Hero Academia. Izuku didn't cheer. He didn't shout. He simply sat there in his chair, tears streaming silently down his face, the dam of a lifetime of anxiety and doubt finally breaking. It was real. After everything, it was finally, impossibly real. He wasn't just a boy with a dangerous, borrowed power. He was a student of UA High. He was on his way. The first day of school arrived in a blur. Dressed in the crisp, smart UA uniform, Izuku stood before the colossal door of Class 1A, a door so large it seemed built for giants. He took a deep, steadying breath, trying to calm the electric hum of nervousness and excitement that was causing the lights in the hallway to flicker subtly. He was in the same class as the stern, bespectacled boy from the exam orientation, and he slid the door open to see Bakugo already seated, his feet propped up on the desk in a display of casual arrogance, arguing heatedly with the very same boy Izuku had just been thinking of. It is an insult to the upperclassmen and the master craftsmen who made these desks. The serious boy, Tenya Ida, chopped his hand through the air for emphasis. Bakugo just sneered. Like I care. What middle school you from, you damn extra? Their argument died the moment Izuku stepped through the door. Ida's head whipped around, his expression shifting to one of intense recognition. Bakugo's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku, and the lazy arrogance on his face curdled into a look of pure, unadulterated rage. You, Bakugo growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He slowly took his feet off the desk and stood up, his posture radiating menace. Every head in the classroom turned to watch. Ah! The curly-haired boy, Ida said, striding over with mechanical precision. I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. I misjudged you completely. Your performance in the practical exam was a masterful display of both power and heroic spirit. You deduced the true nature of the test, did you not? And no, I just... Izuku stammered, completely wrong-footed by Ida's formal intensity and Bakugo's silent, simmering fury. DKU. The name cut through the air like a gunshot. Bakugo was now standing directly in front of him, his body so tense it looked like he might actually explode. The familiar, sweet smell of nitroglycerin began to permeate the air. You lied to me, Bakugo seethed, his voice dangerously quiet. All this time. All those years. You let me think you were a useless, quirkless pebble. You were hiding this thing from me. What the hell is that quirk? Were you looking down on me this entire time? Were you laughing at me behind my back? The entire class was silent, watching the confrontation with a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. Izuku's mind raced. What could he possibly say? It's not a quirk, Kaken. I was chosen by the king of the Greek gods a few months ago after you told me to kill myself. The truth was so insane it was laughable. And no, Kaken, it's not like that, Izuku said, raising his hands placatingly. It only just appeared. It's new to me, too. He fell back on the flimsy late bloomer excuse, the only shield he had. Bakugo's eyes narrowed into slits. Liar, he hissed. The disbelief and fury in his expression were absolute. To him, this was the ultimate betrayal. Izuku hadn't just suddenly become strong. In Bakugo's mind, he had been deceiving him, mocking him, for their entire lives. I'm going to find out what your game is. And I'm going to crush you. Before the confrontation could escalate further, a new voice interrupted them. If you're here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave. Everyone turned towards the door. Lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a disheveled caterpillar, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes, long black hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, unzipping himself from the sleeping bag and standing up with a weary groan. Life is not that long. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. The collective shock of the class was palpable. This tired, apathetic man was a pro-hero? Aizawa paid their surprise no mind. Put these on and meet me on the field, he said, pulling a UA gym uniform out of his sleeping bag as if by magic. We're having a quirk apprehension test. The field was sun-drenched and vast. The students of Class 1A, now clad in their blue gym uniforms, murmured amongst themselves, a quirk test on the first day. Uraraka, the girl from the exam, wondered aloud. What about the opening ceremony? And orientation? No time to waste on pointless pleasantries, Aizawa stated flatly, his gaze sweeping over the students. His eyes lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than the others, his expression unreadable. You've all been using your quirks since you were children, but you've been doing so without a proper understanding of your baseline physical abilities. This test will gauge your raw potential. He explained the series of 8 tests, a 50-meter dash, a grip strength test, a standing long jump, and so on, all standard physical evaluations they had done in middle school, but now they were permitted to use their quirks. The purpose was to establish a benchmark, to see how they could apply their powers to enhance their natural abilities. Bakugo, Aizawa said, his voice void of emotion. You placed second in the practical exam. What was your farthest softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo stepped into the throwing circle, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and as he threw the ball, he unleashed a powerful, focused explosion from his palm. Dai-thai, he screamed, the word echoing across the field. The ball shot into the sky like a rocket, leaving a trail of smoke. A few moments later, Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up for the class to see. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in exclamations of awe. That's insane! We get to use our quirks for real! This is gonna be fun! Aizawa's expression soured. Fun? He said, his voice suddenly taking on a dangerous edge. A wave of pressure seemed to roll off him, silencing the students instantly. You think this is fun? You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? The hero life you're aspiring to is one of constant peril and sacrifice. So, new rule. The student who places last in total points will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. A wave of panic swept through the class. Expulsion on the first day? It was unheard of. It was completely unfair. But the look in Aizawa's eyes told them he was deadly serious. This wasn't a game. This was UA. The test began, and the students showed off their incredible abilities. Ida used his engines to clear the 50-meter dash in just over 3 seconds. Aoyama used his naval laser to propel himself backward. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless to improve her agility. Izuku performed adequately. He was afraid to use his power, terrified of a miscalculation that could injure someone or reveal the sheer, uncontrollable scale of what he was wielding. He used the tiny, controlled lightning dash in the 50-meter dash, clocking in at 4.13 seconds, fast, but not superhuman. He used a localized magnetic field to add a few dozen kilograms to his grip strength test. He was being cautious, strategic, trying to score just high enough to avoid last place without drawing too much attention. But Aizawa was watching his every move. The teacher's tired eyes missed nothing. He saw the hesitation, the almost painful level of restraint. He saw the flickering lights whenever the boy exerted himself. This wasn't a student trying to control his quirk. This was a man trying to contain a nuclear reactor with duct tape. It didn't align with the apocalyptic display from the entrance exam. Finally, it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw. This was it. This was a test of pure output, just like the zero-pointer punch. He couldn't hold back here without immediately outing himself as a fraud or landing in last place. He stepped into the circle, the ball feeling heavy in his hand. He took a deep breath, reaching for the power inside him. He could feel it humming, waiting. He would try to replicate a fraction of the force he'd used on the zero-pointer, channeling the energy into his arm and releasing it in a single, focused burst. He wound up, his arm crackling with golden energy, the air growing thick with the scent of ozone. He threw, and nothing happened. The ball flew a pathetic 46 meters, landing with a soft thud on the grass. The golden energy that had been enveloping his arm vanished as if it had never been there. The humming inside him was gone, replaced by a sudden, jarring silence. Izuku stared at his hand in stunned disbelief. What? I erased your quirk, a dry voice said from behind him. He whirled around. Aizawa stood there, his long black hair floating around his head as if underwater, his eyes glowing a menacing, brilliant red. The layers of his capture weapon were writhing around him like snakes. That ridiculous entrance exam. A person with a power like that shouldn't be able to move a finger without being prepared for the consequences, Aizawa said, his voice low and intense. You were planning to channel that same self-destructive power again, weren't you? To get through the test and then expect someone else to patch you up afterward? Izuku's blood ran cold. He had seen Eraserhead in action on the news, of course. His quirk, Erasure, allowed him to nullify the quirk factor of anyone he looked at. It was the perfect counter for most villains, but a profound, terrifying question bloomed in Izuku's mind. If his power was erased, why didn't he feel normal? Why did he feel this gaping void? The humming wasn't just gone, it felt like a part of his soul had been scooped out. And no, that's not. Izuku stammered, taking a step back. Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping around Izuku's torso and yanking him forward until they were face to face. Don't lie to me, Aizawa hissed, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. Whether your power is a gift or a curse, you cannot be a hero who is useless after firing a single shot. You would be a liability on the battlefield, a dead weight who forces his allies to rescue him instead of fighting the enemy. You do not have potential, Aizawa blinked. His hair fell, his eyes returned to their normal black. The oppressive silence in Izuku's core vanished as the humming sensation of his power flooded back in, a comforting, terrifying warmth. I've returned your quirk, Aizawa said, his tone flat once more. You have one more throw. Get it over with. He turned and walked away, the moment of intense confrontation seemingly over. Izuku stood in the circle, his mind reeling. He had felt it. He had felt the erasure. It had worked. Aizawa had severed his connection to the power. But the implications were earth-shattering. If Aizawa could erase his power, it meant it had a biological component, a quirk factor that could be targeted. But if that were true, why did it feel so alien? So divine? Was the gift of a god filtered through his own mortal biology, creating a hybrid power that was neither quirk nor magic, but something in between? Or was it something else? His thoughts were a tangled mess. But one thing Aizawa had said cut through the confusion with razor-sharp clarity. A hero who is useless after firing a single shot. He was right. The thunderbolt he'd used on the zero-pointer had left him completely incapacitated. If that was the only way he could access his true strength, then he was a one-trick pony, a glass cannon. He had to prove him wrong. He had to show him that he wasn't just a conduit for a single, massive explosion. He had to show him his control. He took his stance again, the ball in his hand. He wouldn't summon the storm. He wouldn't channel a god's fury. He would use his own strength, augmented by the power he had spent 10 months learning to guide. He reached for the humming core of energy, but this time, he didn't pull. He coaxed. He drew a tiny, precise thread of power, no thicker than a needle, and channeled it down his arm, not into the muscles, but around them, like an electromagnetic coil. He focused it all into a single point on the tip of his index finger, the one that would be the last to touch the ball. He began his throw, his motions smooth and practiced. As his arm came forward, the skin on his index finger began to glow with a brilliant, white-hot intensity. There was no explosion, no thunderclap, just a single, sharp crack as his fingertip made contact with the ball, releasing all the focused energy in a single, kinetic instant. The recoil was immense, but localized. A lance of pure agony shot up his finger, and he heard a sickening crunch. The force of the release had shattered the bone. But the ball was gone. It shot forward not like a rocket, but like a railgun slug, a silent, invisible projectile moving so fast it created a visible sonic boom that rippled the air. It flew on a flat, perfect trajectory, disappearing over the horizon. Izuku clutched his hand, his teeth gritted against the white-hot pain. His index finger was a mangled purple mess. But he stood his ground, his eyes, watering with pain, locked on Aizawa. He had done it. He had used his power with devastating force, but he was still standing. He was injured, but he wasn't incapacitated. The entire class stared in stunned silence. Aizawa looked down at the device in his hand. He turned it around, his face a mask of disbelief. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo's score by 1/10 of a meter, using only the tip of his finger. Aizawa looked from the reading to Izuku's determined, pain-filled face, then to his shattered finger. A slow, predatory smile, the first genuine expression any of them had seen on his face, spread across his lips. This kid, he murmured to himself. He's interesting. DKU. Bakugo screamed, his hands sparking with explosions as he lunged forward. What the hell was that? Explain yourself. Before he could reach Izuku, he was ensnared by Aizawa's capture weapon. Stand down, the teacher said, his eyes glowing red once more. Stop making me use my quirk. I've got dry eye. The rest of the tests passed in a blur of pain for Izuku. He managed to complete them one-handed, his performance suffering but his spirit unbroken. When the final scores were posted, he found himself in the middle of the pack, far from last place. The student in last, a short, purple-haired boy named Mineta, was weeping openly. By the way, Aizawa said as he dismissed them, his back turned. The expulsion thing was a lie. The class stared, dumbfounded. It was a rational deception, he said over his shoulder, to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. As the students began to process the deception, Aizawa walked over to Izuku. He looked down at the boy's mangled finger without a word, then handed him a slip of paper. Go to Recovery Girl's office. Get that fixed. Izuku took the pass, nodding his thanks. As he turned to leave, Aizawa's voice stopped him. Midoriya. Izuku looked back. I still don't know what you are, Aizawa said, his voice low enough that only Izuku could hear. Your power. When I use my erasure, it feels wrong. It's not like nullifying a normal quirk factor. It's like trying to put a lid on a volcano. I don't know where you got that power, and frankly, I don't care. But I saw what you did today. You found a way to fight without destroying yourself. That shows potential. He paused, his dark eyes intense. But know this. I will be watching you. Every day. Every exercise. I will push you harder than anyone else, because a power that immense and that unstable cannot be allowed to run wild. You will learn to control it, or I will personally see to it that you are removed from this school. Do you understand? Izuku looked into the eyes of his new teacher, a man who was equal parts terrifying and, strangely, inspiring. He saw not a threat, but a challenge. A promise. Yes, sensei, Izuku said, his voice clear and steady despite the pain. I understand. Aizawa gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving Izuku alone on the field. He looked down at his broken finger, then up at the clear blue sky. He had survived the first day. He had proven he had potential, but he had also discovered a terrifying new wrinkle in the mystery of his power. It was not a quirk, not truly. It was something else, something divine, that had somehow taken root in his mortal body, and it could be suppressed, but not contained. It was a god in a cage of flesh, a cage his teacher couldn't see, but could feel straining against the bars. The mystery of what he had become had only deepened. The next day, the true curriculum of UA High began. Normal academic classes like English, taught by a surprisingly energetic present Mike, filled the morning. But after lunch, the real reason they were all there was announced. I am here! All Might's voice boomed as he slid into the classroom, not through the door, but from the side, his posture awkward but his smile as radiant as ever. Coming through the door like a hero, the class erupted in a wave of excitement and awe. The number one hero, the symbol of peace, was going to be their teacher. Izuku felt a thrill jolt through him, a pure, fanboyish glee that momentarily overshadowed the constant, low-level hum of his power. He watched as All Might, clad in his vibrant Silver Age hero costume, strode to the front of the class. Welcome to the most important class in UA High. Welcome to Hero Basic Training, he declared, striking a dramatic pose. This is where you'll learn what it means to be a hero, through and through, and for our first lesson, we're jumping right into combat training. He gestured to the wall, and sections of it slid open to reveal numbered briefcases. And to go with that, you need these. Your very own, designed by you, hero costumes. The energy in the room was electric, a tangible thing. Izuku's heart pounded. He had submitted his design weeks ago, a simple, practical sketch based on his years of analysis, with a few personal touches. He found his briefcase, number 17, and joined the others as they headed to the changing rooms. His costume was a deep teal-green jumpsuit, simple and durable, with black accents and white gloves. It was designed for mobility and practicality. Elbow and knee pads offered protection, and a sturdy utility belt held a few basic first aid supplies. The most distinctive feature was the mask. It was a metal respirator that covered the lower half of his face, designed to look like a wide, reassuring smile, an homage to his idol. Protruding from the side of the full head cowl were two long, stylized extensions, reminiscent of All Might's own iconic hair tufts, but also subtly evoking the image of a lightning rod or the horns of a mythical beast. He'd incorporated a special filament into the fabric of the suit, a carbon nanotube weave designed to help channel and disperse excess static electricity, a feature he hoped would give him a finer degree of control. Stepping out into the sunlight of the training ground, a sprawling urban cityscape designated Ground Beta, he felt a surge of confidence. Dressed in the gear he had designed, he felt less like a boy playing with a terrifying power and more like a hero in training. He looked around at his classmates. Each costume was a unique expression of their personality and quirk. Ida looked like a medieval knight crossed with a race car. Aoyama's was glittering and ostentatious. Uraraka's was a sleek, pink and black spacesuit-like design that was both cute and functional. And then there was Bakugo. His costume was pure aggression. A black, sleeveless top with a giant orange X across the chest, baggy pants, and massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms. A spiky, explosive-looking mask framed his face, doing nothing to hide the furious, predatory glare he was fixing directly on Izuku. The air around him seemed to shimmer with heat. All Might began to explain the exercise. It would be a 2-on-2 indoor battle trial. One team would be designated as villains, tasked with guarding a fake nuclear weapon hidden somewhere in a multi-story building. The heroes would have to either capture the villains or secure the weapon within a time limit. This is a simulation, All Might emphasized, his smile tightening slightly. But the stakes are real. Your performance here will be a benchmark for the rest of the year. Show me what you've got. He began drawing lots to determine the teams. Izuku watched with mounting anxiety as the pairs were formed. He was dreading one particular matchup, a confrontation he knew was inevitable but hoped would not come so soon. And finally, the last two teams. All Might announced. Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. Izuku's head snapped up. He was paired with the girl he'd saved in the entrance exam. She caught his eye from across the group and gave him a bright, determined smile. Looks like we're a team. Let's do our best, she said, her cheerful energy a welcome antidote to his nervousness. And their opponents, All Might continued, his voice taking on a dramatic tone. The villains will be Team D, Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. A cold, heavy stone settled in Izuku's gut. The breath left his lungs. It was happening. Here and now. The one person who hated him most in the world, who saw his very existence as a personal insult, was now his opponent in a full-contact combat exercise. Bakugo's grin was no longer just a grin. It was a vicious, triumphant snarl that promised nothing but pain. His eyes, locked on Izuku, were burning with a furious, almost joyful light. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was a hunt. So, what's Bakugo's deal? Uraraka asked as they stood outside the target building, a detailed floor plan in her hands. He seems really angry. Especially at you. Izuku flinched, pulling the cowl of his costume up over his head. The respirator settled over his mouth and nose, the filtered air a cool, steadying presence. Kaken and I, we grew up together, he said, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. It's complicated. That was the understatement of the century. How could he explain a decade of worship, fear, and resentment? How could he explain the complex, toxic bond that had been shattered and reforged into something sharp and hateful by the arrival of a god's power. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. This wasn't the time for introspection. Forget about that for now. We need a plan. The villains get a 5-minute head start to prepare. Ida is smart and fast. He'll play the role of a villain perfectly, guarding the objective. Kaken, he's not going to care about the objective. He's going to come straight for me. Uraraka looked at him, her round face serious. You know him that well? Better than anyone, Izuku said grimly. The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. He's a genius when it comes to combat. His instincts are incredible, his quirk is versatile, and he's more driven than anyone I've ever met. But his biggest strength is also his biggest weakness, his pride. He's coming for a fight, not a win. He'll ignore you, Uraraka-san. He'll see you as an obstacle, but I'm his target. He tapped the blueprint. The weapon is likely on one of the upper floors to maximize their defensive advantage. Ida will be there. You're our best bet to secure the objective. Your zero-gravity quirk is perfect for stealth and mobility in a cluttered indoor environment. I'll handle Kaken. Uraraka's brow furrowed with concern. Handle him? Midoriya-kun, you saw him in the apprehension test. He's like a walking explosion. Are you sure you can take him on alone? Izuku looked down at his gloved hands. He could feel the familiar thrum of power, a coiled serpent of lightning waiting beneath his skin. I don't have to beat him, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I just have to buy you time. He met her gaze, his green eyes visible above the respirator, shining with a resolve that surprised them both. I'm not the same person I was 10 months ago. He's about to find that out. The buzzer sounded, signaling the start of the match. Let's go, Izuku said, and together they slipped through a ground-floor window into the shadowy interior of the building. Inside the 5th floor room that housed the papier-mâché bomb, Ida was attempting to get into character. He had cleared the room of all debris, ensuring a clear field of fire for his partner. Bakugo-kun, our strategy should be to fortify this position. The heroes will surely attempt a direct assault, and we must shut up and guard the bomb. 4 eyes, Bakugo snarled. He was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, his grenade-like gauntlets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He wasn't listening. His entire being was focused on the floors below. He could almost smell him. That damn Deku. But our mission is to act as a cohesive villainous unit, Ida insisted, chopping the air with his hand. My mission, Bakugo said, stopping his pacing to stare at Ida with terrifying intensity, is to beat that lying, cheating bastard into the damn ground. He's been looking down on me our entire lives. Today, I'm going to wipe that pathetic smile off his face for good. He heard a faint scuff from the floor below. He grinned, a predatory, feral expression. He's here. Without another word to Ida, he turned and stalked out of the room, his heavy boots echoing in the hallway. Ida sighed, adjusting his helmet. He's not a villain, he's a psychopath. I suppose I must do my part alone. Bakugo moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the building with practiced ease. He was an apex predator in his natural habitat. Every corner, every shadow, was a potential point of ambush. His senses were on high alert, his palms crackling with tiny, impatient explosions. He rounded a corner, and there he was, Deku, standing in the middle of a long hallway, waiting for him. His ridiculous green costume with its stupid rabbit ears and fake smile looked even more punchable in person. So you finally decided to stop running, huh, Deku? Bakugo growled, his voice echoing in the confined space. I'm not running anymore, Kaken, Izuku replied, his voice calm and even, filtered through the respirator. He settled into a low, ready stance. He could feel the static in the air rising, the filaments in his suit beginning to glow with a faint golden light. Bakugo's grin widened. Good. He didn't waste any more time on words. He launched himself forward, his right hand igniting with a powerful explosion that propelled him through the air like a missile. Let's see what your fake quirk can really do. The attack was blindingly fast. The old Izuku would have frozen, paralyzed by fear. The new Izuku moved. He didn't try to dodge sideways. He knew Bakugo would anticipate that. Instead, he channeled a precise burst of energy to his feet, a miniature lightning dash. He shot forward, under Bakugo's propelled lunge, the heat of the explosion washing over his back. He slid on the polished floor, spinning around to face his opponent as Bakugo landed, skidding to a halt. The speed of the movement stunned Bakugo for a fraction of a second. No one had ever moved that fast. "You'll have to be quicker than that." Izuku's voice crackled through his comms unit to Uraraka, a prearranged signal. "Now. Go for the bomb." Bakugo recovered instantly, his shock morphing into deeper rage. He spun, his left hand already swinging in a wide, explosive arc. It wasn't a propelled attack. It was a right hook powered by a detonation, designed to cave in Izuku's skull. Izuku didn't have time to dash again. He brought his arms up, crossing them in front of his face in a defensive block. At the same time, he pulsed a wave of electromagnetic energy outward from his body. Bakugo's fist connected with his guard. The explosion was deafening in the narrow hallway, a concussive blast of force and heat. Izuku was thrown backward, his boots scraping against the floor as he absorbed the blow. The force was immense, rattling his teeth and leaving his arms numb, but the block held. But the EMP had an effect Bakugo hadn't counted on. The electronic ignition system in Bakugo's gauntlets, which regulated the sweat for his larger explosions, flickered. A warning light on the side of the device blinked red. "What the hell?" Bakugo muttered, shaking his gauntlet. That was the opening Izuku needed. He surged forward, his fists wreathed in a crackling aura of golden lightning. He wasn't aiming for a knockout blow, he was aiming for a disabling one. He threw a punch, not at Bakugo's face, but at the sparking gauntlet. Bakugo, relying on instinct, batted the punch away with his other arm, the contact creating a shower of golden and orange sparks. "Not bad, for a cheat," he roared, unleashing a point-blank explosion from his free hand. Izuku used another lightning dash, this time propelling himself backward, out of the blast radius. The wall behind where he'd been standing was blackened and scorched. In the monitoring room, the students of Class 1A were on the edge of their seats. The sheer ferocity of the battle was beyond what any of them had expected. "Whoa, Bakugo is going all out," Kirishima said, his eyes wide. "That's not sparring, that's a real fight, and Midoriya is keeping up with him," Tsuyu noted, a finger on her chin. "His movements are strange. It's like he's teleporting in short bursts." Kero, All Might watched the screen, his trademark smile gone, replaced by a grim, tight-lipped expression. He was clutching the consoles so hard his knuckles were white. "Young Bakugo, you fool," he muttered under his breath. "Your personal grudge is blinding you. You're fighting an opponent, not completing an objective." He was also watching Izuku with a critical, almost fearful eye. The boy's control was breathtaking. He wasn't using the overwhelming, apocalyptic power from the entrance exam. He was fighting with precision, with tactics. He was using his power in small, controlled bursts, electromagnetic pulses to interfere with his opponent's gear, short-range teleportation for evasion, and small-scale electrical shocks for offense. He was fighting like a seasoned pro, weathering a storm and looking for the perfect moment to strike. It was a level of control and strategic thinking that should have been impossible for a first-year student. The fight raged through the building. It was a chaotic ballet of thunder and explosion. Bakugo was relentless, a force of pure, unbridled aggression, turning the sterile hallways into a smoldering war zone. He used his explosions to propel himself off walls, to change direction in midair, to create smoke screens. Every attack was aimed to maim, to utterly destroy. Izuku, on the other hand, was a ghost. He was fighting a purely defensive battle, his focus absolute. He never stayed in one place for more than a second. He used his lightning dashes to evade, to create distance, to lead Bakugo on a wild goose chase through the building, drawing him further and further away from the objective. His mind was a supercomputer, processing Bakugo's attack patterns, predicting his movements, analyzing his fighting style in real time, just as he had done for years in his notebooks. Kaken always opens with a big right. He uses smaller, faster explosions from his left for mobility. He's relying on overwhelming me, not outthinking me. He was also fighting another battle, one for control. With every dash, with every EMP, he could feel the storm inside him wanting to break free. The raw, primal rage from Bakugo was a catalyst, feeding the power, urging it to unleash its full, terrifying might. It took every ounce of his concentration to keep it leashed, to channel only what he needed, a single drop at a time. The strain was immense, and sweat poured down his face beneath his mask. "Stand still and fight me, you coward!" Bakugo screamed, his voice raw with frustration. He had landed a few glancing blows, scorching Izuku's costume and leaving bruises, but he hadn't been able to land a single solid hit. It was infuriating. It was like trying to punch smoke. He finally cornered Izuku in a large, open-plan office space filled with desks and cubicles. There was nowhere left to run. "Now you're mine," Bakugo panted, his chest heaving. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He raised his right gauntlet, the one Izuku had tried to disable earlier. The red warning light had turned green. "You see these gauntlets, Deku? They're not just for show. My quirk secretes a nitroglycerin-like sweat. These babies store it up. I've been saving a big one just for you." He hooked his finger around a pin on the side of the gauntlet. In the monitoring room, All Might's blood ran cold. "Young Bakugo, no! Don't do it! You'll kill him!" He shouted into the microphone. "He'll be fine as long as he dodges." Bakugo yelled back, his eyes glinting with madness. He was no longer listening to anyone. Izuku saw the pin. He knew what Bakugo was capable of. This wasn't a feint. This was real. His mind screamed at him to run, to dash, to get out of the way. But there was nowhere to go. The attack would destroy the entire floor. "Don't command, guide." All Might's voice from months ago echoed in his mind. "You can't stop a storm, but you can give it a safe path to follow." He didn't have time to create a path. So he would have to become the path. As Bakugo pulled the pin, Izuku made a decision. He stopped retreating. He planted his feet, digging his heels into the linoleum floor. He held his hands out in front of him, not in a block, but with his palms open, facing the oncoming blast. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in the fight, he didn't just coax the power. He unleashed it, not as an attack, but as a shield. A dome of crackling, semi-transparent golden energy erupted around him, a hemisphere of pure, condensed lightning. It wasn't solid. It was a swirling vortex of electromagnetic force, a personal lightning storm contained in a perfect, geometric shape. Bakugo unleashed his ultimate attack. A massive, concentrated beam of explosive energy, far larger and more destructive than anything he had used before, shot from his gauntlet. It was a weapon of mass destruction scaled down to a personal level. The beam crossed the room in an instant, engulfing Izuku's position in a blinding flash of orange light. The entire building shook. The cameras in the room were blown out, the feed cutting to static. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Bakugo was thrown backward by the recoil, his arm aching. He stood up, panting, a triumphant, savage grin on his face as he stared into the thick, black smoke that filled the room. "Did I get him?" he whispered, the adrenaline starting to fade, a flicker of genuine concern momentarily piercing his rage. As the smoke began to clear, a sight that was utterly impossible greeted him. The far wall of the room was gone, blasted open to the outside world. The desks and cubicles were vaporized, but in the center of the devastation, a perfect half-sphere of scorched and blackened floor remained untouched. And in the center of that circle stood Izuku. He was on one knee, his head bowed, his body trembling with the strain. His golden energy shield had vanished. His costume was shredded in places, but he was otherwise unharmed. He had taken Bakugo's ultimate attack, a blast that could have leveled a small building, and had emerged without a single major injury. He slowly raised his head, and his green eyes, glowing with a faint, residual light, met Bakugo's. There was no fear in them. Only a deep, profound exhaustion, and a quiet, steely resolve. Bakugo stared, his mind completely unable to process what he was seeing. He had put everything into that shot. It should have been over. It should have been a complete and utter victory. But Deku was still there. That useless, quirkless, worthless Deku had taken his ultimate attack and was still looking at him. It was impossible. It broke every rule of the world he had built for himself. How? Bakugo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and something that felt terrifyingly like fear. I told you, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice raspy as he pushed himself to his feet. I'm not the same person anymore. Upstairs, Uraraka had heard the massive explosion. Midoriya-kun! She yelled into her comms, her voice filled with panic. I'm okay, Uraraka-san, Izuku's voice crackled back, strained but clear. Now! It's your chance! The whole building is unstable. Go! That was all the prompting she needed. While Ida was distracted by the shaking of the building, she made herself weightless and floated up behind him. She touched his back. Release! She made him float, then spun him around and touched the bomb. I've secured the weapon! She shouted. A loud buzzer echoed through the building. The hero team. Why Yins? All Might's voice declared. Downstairs, the fight bled out of Bakugo. The declaration of his loss was a physical blow. He had been so focused on Izuku, so obsessed with breaking him, that he had completely forgotten about the mission. He had lost. And worse, he had failed to even scratch his true opponent. He looked at Izuku, at the quiet strength, the impossible power, and the foundation of his world began to crumble. Izuku swayed on his feet, the last of his energy reserves finally giving out. The shield had taken everything he had. He had won the battle and the trial, but the cost was immense. He had proven his point, to Kaken, to his teachers, and to himself. He was not just a glass cannon. He could defend. He could endure. He could be a shield as well as a sword. As the medical bots arrived to take him to the nurse's office, he looked over at Bakugo. The boy was just standing there, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in his entire life, Izuku didn't see a bully or a rival. He saw a boy whose entire world had just been shattered. And he felt a pang, not of triumph, but of a strange, aching sympathy. The storm had passed, leaving two very different kinds of wreckage in its wake.